became the story of teen empowerment, and it still speaks to those topics. And in addition, behind the scenes, there was this feeling of we're making the good series. So there was this sort of, we get to make the much cooler series than Friday the 13th. So sometimes insulting other people. But it's like, how much are you going to do if you have to take them to space, whereas we have the entire dreamscape. So it allowed us this massive, much greater creativity than don't go in the basement. And Nightmare 3 and Nightmare 4 were so ambitious, and if I wrote my book, it would be everything I know I learned from Nightmare on Elm Street. Because I had to learn how to do every type of effect. And it was so ambitious, the things that we tried to do.
So why don't we have that book yet?
I've been busy. I've been busy on a few other things, fortunately. It's waiting to be. But I had to learn how to do, Nightmare 3 and 4, but 3 in particular. We had puppetry, we had people pulled in and out of mirrors, and visual effects that were on film. So, as well as, life-size, massive snake, television sets, explosions. It was just absolutely nonstop. And I remember there's something in the film business called a completion bond, which is a company that if you can't finish your film, they take it over and they finish it for you and they don't give a shit. So they would come all the time to check that their investment was safe. And I remember the completion bondsman, as I was just barely hanging on to being able to get the film completed, coming and saying, "Your train is on a very steep downhill. Your foot is barely on the brakes." And I'm like, yeah, and we're going to get there.
Now on Dream Warriors, and actually let's start before that. How did you get started working with the Nightmare franchise? And because you were there from the very beginning, how did you get started with it?
So the very first, I'll make this quick so I don't steal too much of Ken's time. The very first film I worked on was, I volunteered growing up in Baltimore to work on John Waters' Polyester. And that's where I met New Line, who was the producer on that. So that's where I met Bob Shea, who's a notorious part and very important part of the Nightmare series. It really was his passion project. I then went to work, I went to work at New Line in New York and worked on this film Alone in the Dark. And then I moved to LA to work with Roger Corman. And when New Line got their first film in LA, it was Nightmare. And they called me up and asked me if I would be the accountant on it, because I had been so tough with Bob. I had been the accountant on Alone in the Dark. I knew nothing about accounting. But I'd been so tough with Bob in making him pay attention to the finances that I got. And I was like 22. But I've been like, you have to pay attention to this. I don't know why. And so they asked me again, and I said, at that point I didn't want to do accounting anymore, so they said, okay, I'll be your accountant, but I'm also going to be your location manager. So, which are two jobs that don't fit together at all, but I was responsible for finding the Nightmare house. Then they came back to me on Nightmare 2 and said, will you do the same thing? And I said, no, I'll be your production manager, which is one step up. And they said yes, and then they came back at Nightmare 3 and said, will you be the production manager again? And I said, no, I'd like to produce. And they said yes. So that's, very, very, very lucky that Bob relied. And then Nightmare 3 was so hard and we pulled it off, they gave me an in-house job. Which then led to 4, and I took a leave of absence for 5, and then I directed part 6.
Oh, if I knew that's how it worked, I would have called and said, can I be a producer? And they would have said no. I don't know. I'm best if you just ask me. I do know this here with New Line. I got a chance to meet some wonderful people, and I hope Rachel knows, but New Line, and they make history, especially in the African American community, because I'm the first African American to ever survive and return to a sequel in a major international film. And in that that said volumes. To this day, I get, I remember one night after Nightmare 3, about a couple of weeks after Nightmare 3, I was in the bed about 3 o'clock in the morning, and my agent had told me that someone wanted to call me. Was it okay? And I was young, and I said, yeah, okay, anybody could call me. But I had this call about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I hope I don't offend anyone what I'm about to do, and I said, hello. They said, I didn't know your phone. And I said, huh? So it turned out that it was a dignitary's son in Taiwan birthday. And his hero was Kincaid. So he had called with a translator, the translator just for Kincaid to say happy birthday. And about 3 weeks later, I received this here drawing from him. He drew Kincaid. And from there, I never experienced anything to this day that was so great. So you have no idea how much I have such love for New Line, Sunmore, and Nightmare on Elm Street.
Now, how did it come about that you wound up auditioning for Nightmare 3?
Chuck Russell, I don't know if you know this story, Reggie. This is the first time I've been.
I know, we've done this.
Yeah, is that, when, and that been in, my agent, which was David Wilder at the time, wanted me to meet her. And so what they had to break down was this slim bodybuilder guy with this 29-inch waist. And at the time, that was my thigh. So I didn't want to go in. I just didn't want to go in. I had to go to court that day. It was raining, and I didn't have a car. So I had to travel to downtown LA, and then it was just pouring rain and then come back. So I had to catch like 3 buses to get there. So I just didn't want to be there. And so when I got there, I had to set everything up. That the bus would get there like at 3:20. My audition was like at 3:50, and I could catch that 4:15 bus and get home and not get wet. And so I get there, they was behind.
Of course.
And I was like, trying to be religious, saying, oh shit. Anyway, so I finally got into, and all these guys was like, had these nice bodies, and I'm trying to hold in my gut. So I went into the audition, and I just had a quick attitude, and Chuck Russell said, read it as if you would read it. Just do what you feel. And I kind of like cussed him out. So it was in there, and Chuck was in there, and after I cursed, Chuck said, oh, this is really nice, this is really nice. Why don't we try it this way? And I'm saying to myself, oh, this is a real fool. So I just knocked stuff down. So I figured, if I'm not going to get the audition, why not go all the way? So, I'm not thinking that, but that's what happened. So I get home the next day. David Wilder, the agent, called. We didn't have, we couldn't screen phones then. So, and I said, hello. He said, Ken, what the hell did you do? And I said, I told you not to send me. He said, they love you. So I went back to the art. They saw me again. Next thing I know, I got the role. And then I had to make a choice. And because I come from the South, I come from a religious family, and nobody wanted me to do the movie because it was cursing in it. And my pastor kept saying, you can't do this movie, and they're going up there in Hollywood, it's making you this and making you that, and I really wanted to do it. So I called a lady who was like my grandmother, who was in her 80s, and this lady carried the Bible. Everywhere was the Bible. This is a true story. And I called her and I told her what was going on. She said, hello, babe, tell me, Mama, what you want to know. And I told her I was trying to do the movie. I think the Reverend don't want me to do it because I cursed. And then she said, let me put my Bible down. She put the Bible down. She said, talk to me. And finally she said, does it pay? And I said, yes, ma'am. And she said, fuck 'em.
fully violent. It only mattered that there was cursing.
Stab people everywhere, just no effort.
Kill teenagers, but
Yeah. Now, you said that you weren't initially what they had envisioned Kincaid as, so the performance that ended up on, in the movie, how much of that was on the page and how much of that was your input?
I think the thing that with New Line, it was on the page. Everything was on the page. I didn't go there and do anything, but he did allow me to be more of me on the page because because he would ask me sometime, would a black guy say this?
Right.
And so he would allow me to do it. Not change the script, that's important.
Right.
Not change it, but he would allow me to put a little more of my nuances in there. So, and I think, and just be free because I was scared just to be free. And that's what I had to learn to do.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Kincaid being the first black character to survive a horror movie and come back in the sequel. Do you think that they were doing that intentionally, like as, hey, this hasn't been done before, just make a point, or do you think it was just, this character is so strong we need him around for the whole thing?
I don't know. I know that, at the time I was doing stand-up, so it was great stand-up. I would tell my friends in Part 4, if you want to see me, forget the popcorn, forget the drink, go right to the theater. But I don't know. I know as an actor, all actors I think do this, is that when we get the script, especially as a black actor, when you get the script, you don't look at the first page, you start looking at the last page to see if you see it. So I looked at the last page and I wasn't there, but next to the last page I was there, and I said, oh, they forgot something here. But no, I don't know. I never question another writer's work. I just don't do that because I'm a writer and I give respect to writers.
Okay.
I don't think we were woke enough to. I don't think Chuck was woke at that point. I think it just was he liked that character and they were I think it was just, and Ken brought so much to it. It was incredible and made Chuck just make that character so much stronger. But I don't think there was any active we must. There was much less discussion of the political correctness.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, you say you were a producer on 3, correct?
Yeah.
Because you had different jobs on all of them. Producer's one of the less understood roles in the film world. What exactly was what did you do on 3 as producer?
So the reason that the producer's misunderstood is because there's 50 producers and they all do different things. But I'm credited as the line producer, but I was really what I tend to call the day-to-day producer, which is basically I was there 24/7, making sure that everything happens. And you're both looking out for the money and also distributing the money. So every decision about where we put the attention and every amount that I spent so much time on that film trying to get Chuck under control. Because he was so out of control financially. It was his first directing job, and he just wanted. He thought he was on a $100 billion film. But yeah, so I was absolutely involved day to day on every single set of decisions and made sure that everything was there. And in theory, everything worked, which it didn't always. But I helped figure out. I mean, we had 4 different makeup effects companies, so I was running all of them. Which company to use to do what, and it was an incredible amount of organization involved with managing the money and creatively supporting Chuck while keeping him from spending the entire budget in the first 4 days, which he wanted to do.
Now, there's been, especially in Never Sleep Again, y'all both mentioned that it was a rather tumultuous set at times, and that there might have been some tension on set. Could you tell us anything about that and how you keep a film like that together when there's kind of a little tension between some of the parts?
I never said it because I want to work again. I purposely. Well, I didn't know.
There were outtakes, my friend.
No, I didn't. Only thing that I remember, I just remember, when we was doing, Rachel, we was doing the Dunyan scene. I remember, I think it was Jerry, guy named Jerry, is it Jerry? He walked up to the very top that day and he said, I remember him saying, everything stops here. I just remember that day because I didn't know. I think they didn't allow the actors, at least I didn't know, because I would just go to my dressing room and I would just stay there. And so that's what it was. I came from a world where my grandmother would say, don't make no waves. And I was not trying to do that. I felt like I had to represent, and I was not making any waves. And so I don't know. I know there was a love triangle going on there, and Rodney and Patricia Arquette, because they've talked about it. That's why I'm talking about it now.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Oh God. Oh yeah, there was a big thing going on back there. He was so in love with Patricia Arquette.
Yeah.
He was so in love with her. But Patricia Arquette, I didn't, like I said, at that time, everybody was just nice. So I was not aware of all the things that I heard later that was going on. And that is the truth. And I'm so glad, because I can't talk about it now. That's all I know. I just remember the guy going up to the top. It was hot over there. It was like the jail.
We were in the jail in north of downtown, yeah.
What was his Ocean? Was his name Ocean? Gary Ocean or something?
Jerry Olson.
Yes, I remember him going up to the top, and he was talking to everybody. Is that Don?
Yes.
That's my friend.
Sorry.
That's all I remember. And everything. I knew there was some tension, but it was never, I thought it was more behind the scenes, what they was on, not me, but being somewhat nervous, there was times that I thought maybe I wasn't doing good as an actor, but that was nothing directly, so I have no dirt for it.
Right.
Not on the table.
Yeah. How about you?
Well, clearly I didn't know what was going on if I wasn't even aware that Rodney was in love with Patricia.
Oh.
I was managing, maybe I did know and I'd forgotten.
Yeah.
Or maybe it was just unimportant compared to I mean,
we was all kids. We was,
Yeah, you were so young, and Patricia was just 18, and so young. And of course, my memory is relatively muted as well. I did fire the entire crew in the first week, so I guess it was tumultuous. And I'll tell a few stories that probably haven't been told, which is the original director of photography looked at what's her name? Who got into the television, my big break in TV.
The
Actor, yeah, the actress.
Yeah.
Lawrence Fishburne, was it Lawrence?
No, the girl, the blonde.
Heather? No, the girl who got pulled, Patricia.
Yeah.
Patricia Arquette.
No, the other one, the one who gets pulled into the TV.
The whole walk in the project.
Penelope.
Penelope, right. So he looks at a picture, the original director of photography, who was known, Chuck really wanted him, and he was known for doing rock videos, and I never could figure out what Chuck liked about him, because he'd done all these rock videos from Air Supply, and that to me was like cardinal sin. So he looks at a picture of her, and he says, "I cannot like her. She has a face like a plate."
Oh, wow.
Yeah, wow. This is my first producing gig, and I've got a director of photography saying that to me, and I'm like, how could you hire her? She has a face like a plate. And don't put that in the press, but I mean, I still, 30 years later, remember that. Then we go in the first day, he's lighting so much that we get like 8 setups. Normally we would get between 20 and 40. And so Chuck comes to me, he's like, we can't do this. So I go see him and I say, you're making Nightmare on Elm Street, you're expected to get a minimum of 20 setups a day, and we really should be getting 40. And he looked at me and he said, you do not want me to light it, I will shoot black leader. And black leader is like just black, I'll basically shoot, unlit film. I won't, if you don't want me to light it, I'll make it all black. So that was where I was. And so I remember calling Bob Shea on day 2 when we got 8 setups on day 2 as well, and saying afterwards and saying, I have to get rid of this guy. So I wiped out the whole, I think the whole camera and electric team, and Chuck didn't get along with the AD from day 1. So by day 3 I'd put together an entirely new crew, and we continued to shoot without any loss of time. So if you, when it comes to tension.
We didn't know that.
It's just a new guy. So you try and protect. I mean, I'm sure there were tensions everywhere because it was so ambitious and complex. But your job is to protect.
Yeah.
Because I remember, and one other tale out of school, don't publish this on the internet, story is that the first day, so Chuck was so far behind that the first day we worked with Patricia, she didn't come on set until 4 a.m. And she had a 4-page dialogue scene, and she struggled with it. And it was 4 days. I don't think she'd ever been up all night her entire life. And Chuck came to me and said, she can't do it, she can't do it. And I just looked at him and said, I will not fire her on day 1 when you made her work at 4 a.m. I told you that we should wrap and start the next day. And then the next day when we came, then it was the weekend, and then the next week, which was brilliant. But I remember just putting my foot down and saying, I'm not playing that game with you. You've got to take this, you've got to respect the actors more.
Now, let me see by show of hands. How many of you was Dream Warriors your favorite Elm Street flick? You see that a lot from a lot of people. That seems to be the general consensus. Was there ever a point on set where either of you kind of looked around and went, damn, we're making something special here?
Oh, yes. Every minute. I knew that, from reading the script, I knew the script was exceptional. You had Chuck and Frank Darabont writing the script. And it was just so good. And interestingly, Wes Craven and Bruce Wagner, who was also a very impressive screenwriter, had written the first draft of it. And they had basically written something that was absolutely unproducible. And I brought Chuck in because he came to me and he said, I really want to direct, and I've got this great idea. And I brought him in to pitch the new idea. And they really nailed the script. And then we were, and at one point, Bob Shea, you could tell that you were pleasing the executives because he kept, funneling more money, which in Netflix world would mean whole new. In my world was like, you can have one more piece of rubber.
Was there ever a moment when you guys kind of looked around the set and were realized that you were making something that would really be a fan favorite and stand the test of time?
Oh, I realized when I got hired, I was making it was just, I don't know, it was my first. It was my, I had recently did a TV film, but it was my first role as a star in a major film as an actor. That was hard enough for me, but I had not read seen a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, but on the bus, when I was on the bus and I told them I was going to an audition, and the lady asked me, it was Nightmare on Elm Street. These are people, and everybody's head turned around. Nightmare on Elm Street? It was not the choir, so I had to say, young man, you need to wake up. So, but no, so yes, it was special to me, just special. And I'm always talking about that. I met some wonderful friends there. So it was not a night. What was a nightmare became a dream.
And he said, obviously, you talk about Elm Street movies being a family, everyone who worked on it. The chemistry between that group of kids in the movie, you can tell you guys, really kind of gelled as a unit. Do y'all still have those bonds when you see each other at conventions and stuff?
Yes, and I think that happened because Chuck, once we was all cast together, he brought us got us together in Westwood. So we was together a couple of times before the movie and got to be able to meet each other and talk with each other. We became friends then and we connected then. And that worked because I think one of the first things that we filmed was the film was in the hospital, the psycho ward. So it helped because we all knew each other, and we all became, and we was all friends, and we all was looking after each other. We all understood each other. Bradley and I became buddies, and well, Bradley not at the time, because he was my roommate, and so I just had the gratitude with him, and it was just what Kincaid represented, and so it was. And I give Chuck credit for that. He brought us all together. We didn't just meet on the set. We had met before that.
And now, of course, then we moved on to part 4, which you were in for about 3 minutes, something like that.
They forgot to kill me.
Right. And then we moved forward. And how did it come about that you took 5 off and then come back as a director?
So during part 5, first of all, I was really burned out after 3 and 4. They were incredibly hard. Chuck Russell was hard to work with and ambitious, and Rennie was easier to work with but ambitious. But actually, I took a leave of absence from New Line to do John Waters' Crybaby. So that's why I wasn't around for part 5. And after I finished Crybaby, then Bob Shea decided that he would direct the film that he was passionate about, which is a book based on a William Kotzwinkle novel. The novel's called Jack in the Box. The film was called Book of Love. And so after I produced the film that Bob directed, I was able to go and say, since you gave yourself your own first film, could I please do Freddie's Dad? And I came up with calling it Freddie's Dad and putting the publicity into making it the last. Because we were making those movies every single year. So they would choose a distribution date, and we would back time it from the distribution date. And Nightmare 4 is notorious because the writers went on strike during the writers' period. So we had a distribution date and no writers. So basically we put the film together. I mean, the reason it's a weaker film in terms of story is because we put the film together basically with characters and deaths and through a storyline kind of without writers around it.
Now, was the series always planned to continue, or some of those times when they killed Freddy were they like, that's it, and then you had to come up with a file nail in the coffin? How many times was Freddy dead before Freddy's dead killed Freddy dead? I think I said that right.
I don't know. I think the fandom has to answer that. I mean, we never talked about Freddy being really, really dead. Well, I do actually. This leads to. I guess he was probably dead after each episode because I remember I was with Rennie Harlan when we were prepping Nightmare 4, and I was at the visual effects house, and James Cameron was doing Terminator, I think then. Or maybe it was, God, I don't have my timing anymore. But anyway, Jim was there, and I knew Jim from Roger Corman days, so I introduced him to Rennie, and Rennie was like, wow. And so there's this sort of awkward moment between the guys, and I'm letting them sort of do their thing. And Jim said, so how does Freddy come back to life this time? And Rennie goes, a dog pisses fire. And Jim goes, yep. Of course, all right then.
That was my dog.
So that's when it gets crazy.
Yes.
Now, part 6 definitely has the most intentional camp factor of any of the movies. I'm guessing that has to go back to you kind of cutting your teeth working with John Waters and that influence. Not really. I mean, yes, of course, but not. I mean, I think what's misunderstood about me in part 6 is that I was very much given the directive that the box office fell off a great deal in part 5, and part 5 was one of the most violent episodes, and they had to cut some of the most out of it. And so I was given the directive to be funnier, and Mike DeLuca wrote a funnier script. And so Robert embraced the camp. It is definitely not the film that I would make now in terms of, but at that time period, because that was the directive, so I feel like I'm kind of misunderstood. It's like you made the campy one, you didn't make the, and we increased the box office
by 25% by making the funnier one. So I fulfilled my directive, but have taken a huge amount of shit for it. And if you don't have that sort of, if you can't appreciate the camp factor, then I can understand your anger at it. But I also feel like I should be able to defend myself in that was my direction. I mean, my instruction to make it a much lighter version.
Did you actually think Freddie was dead?
Are you kidding? No, the Iggy Pop song that I put at the end where he says, do you really think that he says it directly, do you really think that Freddie's dead? And Iggy told me that he's made more money on that one song than any other song in his career. And that might not be true now, but he was blown away that what you could make off doing a successful movie song. No, I knew he wasn't dead, but I didn't know that they were going to bring him back in such an interesting way. I thought New Nightmare was, although it didn't work, it was absolutely fascinating for what Wes did with it.
Very cool. Well, at this point, do we have any questions from the audience? I'd like to open it up. Anyone have hands, questions?
I do. The 80s horror movies, well, horror movies in general, a lot of stereotypes in those, a lot of poor treatment or poor portrayal of race, gender, and all kinds of other things. Part 3 of Elm Street, I thought, with the subject of mental health. I feel like it still does a really good job with that. I want to know, was there any discussion about how to handle that subject? Were you trying to, honor those people and be careful not to, be offensive or stereotype them?
I don't know. I know that Helga and I, we were recently together, and she brought that up at a convention, and I had not put it together like she had put it together. I know that in my life I've dealt with a lot of people who have mental conditions, and it works on me. And I've received many letters from people who say because of that, Kincaid gave them strength to believe in themselves. And that's the thing I think about Kincaid. Kincaid had natural power. He had something that you could achieve, which was strength and lifting. The others had a little more, like the fantasy and stuff. But I think that that's what it was, that Kincaid did not give up. Even in that mental ward when he was singing Ain't Gonna Dream No More, No More. Everybody relates to that. And so, I think that it did. I think that they did things that they did not know that they were doing.
Right.
And it just so happened. But I think it happened because it was a great script. And it was written from the heart as well as from the mouth.
Care to comment on that?
As I said, I don't think we didn't have as much discussion about. Didn't go to mental health professionals to make sure that it wasn't that everything was politically correct. We knew from. Heather Langenkamp was that first representation of women, of strong women, that worked so well, and we knew how important all the representation was. That this deep strength that Ken brought so much to, but also the other characters brought different versions of. And certainly we weren't told, now you couldn't do the kid in the wheelchair without it being a kid in the wheelchair. So we weren't in those days having to worry about things like that, but we were extremely aware of the importance of the kids all being individuals and very, very strong. And that's made a difference everywhere.
Very happy to hear that. That's awesome.
Anybody?
Rachel, you mentioned working with the makeup effects people on part 3, and the Nightmare series is known as like the pinnacle of what, New Line let practical makeup artists do. What was the craziest idea one of the effects guys ever pitched you that you were just like, we can't pull that off? There's no way.
I don't know that I got, there was a sequence in Nightmare 3 that and this is not a makeup effects sequence, I don't have an answer to that. I think that, although I want to say that doing the tongues was one of the hardest things.
It still looks real though.
So unbelievably hard, because anything sort of small and snake-like is really, really hard when you don't have the assistance of digital. But I will tell you about the scene that got cut out, that got cut from the script because we hit the place where we couldn't financially do it. And I hope I get to do this justice, which is, I think Heather wakes up, or maybe it's Patricia. I can't remember who it was now. It's a long time ago. But there's a sequence where they wake up and they walk into the dining room, and the dining room is, they stand outside their dining room, and the entire floor is glass and reflects everything in it. And they step in, and it becomes water, but it becomes little bits of water, so they can still walk across the water. And then they get pulled underwater, and then have this battle with a Freddy snake. And the difficulty of designing how to create a water pool and suspend the furniture. I mean, thinking about it now, it's like, what's the big deal? I mean, everything digitally is so simple. But the work that we did, and we talked about blacking out a swimming pool and suspending the furniture, and then putting a glass piece that you could then, and Mick Strawn, who has a book out now about Nightmare 4, who is the production designer, was an absolute genius innovator in terms of coming up with affordable solutions to things. And Mick helped me distribute what went to which company between mechanical effects and art department. And also he helped me, he just stayed involved in all elements of and the regular special effects and the makeup effects. But I don't specifically remember being pitched. I mean, we pitched our ideas to them. The makeup effects people didn't.
Yeah.
But we'd have these roundtable meetings where everyone would just come up with their ideas. So like Rick, your little meatball, and things like that. And Bob had this rule: never repeat. So you were supposed to never repeat the same shot. So if you put the same shot in twice, you would be like, forget it, cut it out, cut it out. And I think that's stayed with me, which didn't entirely answer your question, but it gave you a different set of things that I remember.
Anybody else?
Were scripts ever rewritten during filming?
Part 4 constantly, because we didn't have a writer. So we had different, and part 4 had 10 writers before we had a writer. It was very, very, very hard to find somebody who would, if I listed for you, and I can't do it off the top of my head, but the people who wrote for it, including it's well known, Peter Jackson did a script, and people wrote these scripts that weren't Nightmare on Elm Street. So what Chuck came in with was really, really, really a strong script, and nobody after that was really, until DeLuca, was capable of really understanding Nightmare, and then DeLuca was, brought the sort of the humor back to it. But on 4 and 5 in particular, we had changes all the time.
One more right over here.
How did your approach to directing Freddy's Dead differ from like something like Teen Girl?
Well, they're both.
Or did it?
I mean, Tanker was my passion project. So Tanker was just balls to the wall, everything we can do, insanity. I had much more strict sort of thoughts about what Nightmare should be, and from my experience in making all the Nightmares, and also as a more experienced director on Tank Girl, but still like so inexperienced compared to, I mean, everything would be, all these movies I've made completely differently now that I've learned all the things that I've learned since then, and if we'd been in a digital world. But I had the confidence on Tank Girl to really make it my own, and it was, but Nightmare was Nightmare. We were very burdened. The other thing about Freddy's Dead was we were very, very burdened by the 3D. That was a marketing decision, clearly. and about $1 million was spent on that lousy 3D. And that's $1 million that I had that was less than the other previous directors. And so you can tell that the effects really, and Mike wrote a lot of effects that were perfect for digital, but extremely difficult, like Spencer in the video game. And so a lot of the money that I could have had on Freddy to make it more like the other films, I didn't have because of the 3D.
And we are starting to run a little short on time, so what I'd like now is to kind of get what you guys have been up to since your Nightmare days, what you're up to now, and all that kind of good stuff. Let's start right here, you can.
Well, what most people don't know is that before I became an actor, I was a staff writer at Paramount. I don't think you knew that.
I didn't know that. I knew you were. I mean, I knew you were a writer. But I didn't know that.
And I won a Cable Ace Emmy for writing a Disney film. So, and I just finished writing a book called The Seven Maids from Stockbridge, which is based on my mother's experience as a maid in Stockbridge and the things she had to go through the civil rights movement. So it's not a horror film, but what they had to go, ladies had to go through was horror. And so in 1997, I started an organization called the Giving Back Corporation, where I pay for young people books when they go to college, and I send kids to camp during the summer. And for Thanksgiving, for Christmas, I buy at least 20 families dinners for Thanksgiving, and I have a toy drive. In other words, I do all the things that I did not have when I was a kid. I promised God that when I reached a certain level, I was not going to forget from which I come, and I do that. And it's the organization Giving Back. So come by, if you came by a picture, put a donation there. 100% of my signing goes back to the inner city youth, because I was one of those youth that dreamed, and I want to keep it moving.
Ken, when's your book coming out?
It's coming out this week, and it's
Kind of important.
but I have it's coming out. But you have, if you go online, go to my Facebook page, you can see where you can order it. And also, as of this year, I've helped put over 400 kids through college, and 5 of them received their PhD this year.
I don't want to follow that. I directed a lot of television. Although I can slightly follow that, which is I do have my own organization that gives money to indigenous communities based on a film I made to do with Canada's most prolific serial killer, and who preyed on the indigenous and marginalized communities. And we have an organization that also is to do with educating,
Yes.
to giving money for education to indigenous communities. But also the other really important work I do is with the ACLU. And I cannot say enough how much the ACLU has changed my life in terms of the ACLU's involvement with women and marginalized directors and people of color. And BAME, that's the word I'm looking for. So the ACLU has been hugely involved in the issue of women directors, and over the past 5 years, I have seen the improvements. It's not been Me Too. It's been what the ACLU did to sue the studios that have allowed women directors to finally have, and this is working with people of color as well, that there's finally diversity in the directing pool. So I give 50% to my indigenous and 50% to the ACLU, and now more than ever do we need the ACLU. So, and everybody vote.
And I am still acting. I just recently did a film.
Yay!
I never stopped acting.
And I'm still directing. Including right now.
Awesome. I could, obviously, so we can sit here and talk all day, but I've got one quick question for each of you, and then we'll wrap it up. Who is more fanatical, Fredheads or Whovians?
Oh, I'm not going to answer that because I'm not sure, but I'll be interested in your answer. But I will say that in my social media, the Fredheads are on Facebook and the Whovians are on Twitter. What does that mean?
And my question for you, Kincaid has, aside from Freddie, Kincaid has the most quotable lines of the entire series. Do you have a favorite?
Favorite what?
A favorite Kincaid line? There's no kids in here, you can say them.
I don't, and I have to say this, I don't. I can tell you this here, when I had to say fucking A, I did not know what the hell that meant. Now that you brought that up, you know, I can understand that you didn't say anything, because that's the only thing that me and Chuck Russell got into it. I said, what the hell is fucking A? I don't screw A's. I could not get into that. And he just said, well, Kenny, can you see? He said, well, I said, what do you mean? You mean I get the hell out? I said, oh, that's great. What they got to do with an A? I could not get it. Maybe because I never got an A when I was in school. But now, as I sign autographs, everybody asks me to put fucking A.
It reminds me of one story, which is, and I don't know if you remember this, but there was an expression on set called that where they said the big spank. Were you aware of that?
No.
So they would say, and what it meant was they would say Chuck is spanking us, meaning Chuck is just driving us all crazy. So, and he was pushing us, and he pushed everyone. I mean, a lot of the tension on set was how hard Chuck pushed everyone. And so they would constantly say, oh God, they come to me and say it's Chuck spanking us, it's the big spank. So they made these underwear, they made boxer, they made tighty whities, and they made little G-string type underwear that said the big spank on it, Nightmare on Elm Street. And Chuck did not get, he was like isn't this cute? Isn't this great? This is like, he never understood that this was, that was all to do with them saying that him spanking us was not a good thing.
And now those underwear go for a fortune on eBay.
They do.
I got it was, it's a prank that y'all played on me one time. It was like, it was a screening that I needed to go to because I had to do something with Denzel Washington. I had pleaded for you all to let me go. And you okayed it. And I was happy because I had to leave by 6:30. And everybody knew about it. So it was about 6 o'clock. And you kept saying, Ken has to leave, Ken has to leave. And they said, well, let's check and make sure that everything is okay. And I was sitting there and I was like looking, and they said, oh God, we messed up everything. We got to shoot everything all over again. And I couldn't do nothing. I just sit there, but I wanted to cry. And then they said they was joking.
Awesome. Well, everybody, I'd like to thank you for coming out to our panel. Make sure you go back to the side table and drop some money for the call. Let's hear it for our guests. Oh, you have to take it too. Go by her table too. Absolutely. Thank you.